I was in a locker room after a game with a couple coaches from a program that had been a dominant program in their league. And they were having a disappointing year. And one of their assistant coaches pulled me aside and he said, we forgot the age-old credo when we recruit, which is character over talent. Now, there's a deeper, character over talent when talent has no character. But what did we see win, or who did we see win the Super Bowl this year? Hell, they almost won the Super Bowl last year. And the truth is, even the team that won the Super Bowl last year, the Philadelphia Eagles, did they have some big-name players? Sure. Okay, but their quarterback, Nick Foles, had character. He was going to quit the sport. He took pennies on the dollar. He was for the team. You look at the guys that they brought in. Sure, Jay Ajayi was a guy who some thought had too big an ego when he was with the Dolphins. But the Eagles were a great team last year. Remember, all of the injuries they had, this year the Eagles actually had better overall talent. Last year they had better overall character. So when you say character over talent, it doesn't mean you take all guys with character, right? You take a bunch of nerds that are just happy to be there, the old fat girl at the prom. No. But there's a continuum, and on one side there's character, and on the other side there's talent. Always stay on the side of character. That's what the Pittsburgh Steelers have chosen. Pittsburgh Steelers had arguably the best wide receiver in the National Football League in Antonio Brown. They threw him the ball. They gave him a bunch of money. And for whatever reason, likely contract, it wasn't enough for him. Le'Veon Bell, they offered a long-term salary. Granted, not a long-term guaranteed deal, but he also had a franchise tag he could have signed for $14.5 million. And among the reasons that Le'Veon Bell lost yesterday when he signed a huge new contract with the Jets, which is interesting and worthy of discussion. We'll talk about it. His value was hurt because of questions about his character. How many teams do you have to see and hear talk about who they are as people, how they came together as men? And so in the ultimate kind of football social experiment, I give you the AFC North. Right? The AFC North has the Bengals, they're in rebuild mode. Has the Browns, they're loaded with talent. Has the Steelers, who have chosen character. And, should be pointed out, one of their best characters is Ryan Shazier, who will likely never play football again. The Baltimore Ravens, who are going to try their own unique brand of football, which got them to the playoffs this year. And, and you got, of course, the Pittsburgh Steelers. I mean, if that's not a great social experience, because on paper, the Browns should win the division. They have an outstanding defensive line. They drafted well for that defensive line. Baker Mayfield is an experienced quarterback from college, right? 5 years in college, 3 times a Heisman Trophy finalist. He played in a couple of college football playoffs against some of the best defense in the country and came in and started as a rookie kind of mid-year and completely changed how we view the Browns. They got a dynamic young tight end. They have a couple of talented running backs. Oh, yeah, by the way, they're tremendous at wide receiver with Jarvis Landry. Now they have Odell Beckham Jr. Should be pointed out that while they went out and got another running back who led the league in rushing, the Kansas City Chiefs, the drop-off of the Chiefs was not so great. Do you know why? Because they lost a talent, but their character was better. So, look, we could get into, and we will, the fact that the Giants proved me right. Last year, this exact same time, I said, don't give him a new deal. Make him prove that he's a changed guy, a better guy, a good teammate. He had 3 months of good behavior, and you gave him a better deal. You gave him a huge deal. I mean, look, yesterday was an absolute loss for Dave Gettleman, even if he feels like he got his locker room back. Because it's 7 months after agreeing to a new deal for a guy that they had in their building, This is not signing a free agent and going like, man, he's different than we thought. That happens in professional sports. That happens in the business world. You hire a guy from another company, you think you did your due diligence, and all of a sudden he kind of doesn't fit your culture. That happens. The Albert Hainsworth thing happens more often than not. But to have a guy in your own building who you drafted, granted you weren't the GM, but he was in there acting as the future GM before the season was done, and then had the whole entire offseason, and there was no point of pressure that they had to give him a new deal. They did, and now admitted a mistake. But the Giants have looked at the Patriots, looked at the Eagles, and said, hey, character wins. It's not always about talent. There isn't a guy outside the numbers that the Patriots have that you would prefer over either of the two wide receivers that the Browns have. But the Dolphins had essentially the same year without Jarvis Landry they had with Jarvis Landry, right? There's no change. And the Giants are sitting there going like, is Odell Beckham Jr. a incredible talent? Yes. But we gave him a new deal, and as soon as we hit adversity, he threw the coaching staff, the other players, and his quarterback under the bus. And then, when we got a chance to win a game late against Chicago Bears, he bails on an onside kick. Thanks, no thanks, I made a business decision. Which is exactly what the Giants did yesterday. They made a business decision. In their business, they want character over talent. So it's going to be interesting. Look, I'm not saying the talent doesn't work. Talent doesn't win. It won a bunch of games for the Rams. They got all the way to the Super Bowl. Could have won the Super Bowl. Like, we can sit here and say that the Rams experiment of going and getting Ndamukong Suh, who is a mercenary, who does not have, like, in terms of team character, doesn't work out with other guys, doesn't buy into the whole team thing, whatever. You know, they got Marcus Peters, who couldn't fit in Kansas City. By the way, another John Dorsey guy. Aqib Talib, who I love, and is a guy who's overcome an incredible amount of probably self-created adversity. But ultimately, a team of lesser talented players, right? Like, if you're picking teams, like fantasy football, whatever, like you're going to pick teams, you line up the Patriots, you line up the Rams, who are you taking? Like, at almost every position, you're taking the Rams. And yet, they couldn't move the ball. And in the biggest parts of situational football, they couldn't stop a 40-some-odd-year-old quarterback who can't move and doesn't throw like he used to and doesn't have guys that get particularly open. Why? Because character matters. It does. Can't have no talent. There's a continuum. But if you're going to fault on one side, the NFL has spoken. And this is all sports. Like, look, we're watching 2 of the last 3 years. Villanova has won the national championship. But you go back to the first time Jay Wright reached the Final Four, and they had small ball, and they had Kyle Lowry, and they had Allen Ray, and they had Mike Nardi, and they had those guys. Remember that team? The next couple years, like, they had the number 1 recruiting class in the country, and they sucked. Why? Because they recruited talent, not character, not guys that fit in with our kind of guys. That's code for not great character. It doesn't mean that the players, the Chris Jenkins who hit the national championship shot, or the Dante DiVincenzo who was the MVP last year, or any of those guys. Ryan Arcidiacono. Like, Ryan Arcidiacono is in the NBA, but he's in the NBA because he's got great character. He worked his way into being a really, 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 really good, maybe even great college player, and he does all the little things it takes. You never have to worry about him. He's always there on time. He makes open shots. He knows the scouting report. He does everything he's supposed to do. He doesn't have no talent, but in the continuum, it shades on the character side. And he won you a national championship, and he helps change the culture of the Chicago Bulls for the future. And remember, it's not like these guys who all have all these rife personalities with the Cleveland Browns are playing for a guy who has a ton of experience. Freddie Kitchens didn't call plays to start the year. He was a running backs coach. So you're creating an environment where the expectations are ramped up. And I've told you guys this. I don't know if I ever told you this little analogy before, but second-year quarterbacks are worse than first-year quarterbacks. Want to know why? If you have kids, and Ramos is about to have another one, so he'll remember this. If I ask somebody who doesn't have kids, what's the toughest year to raise a child? They'll all say the terrible twos, right? Terrible twos. The terrible twos. They're called the terrible twos. Threes are actually worse. Worse? Yeah. You know why? Because once they become 3-year-olds, they got to sleep in a big boy and a big girl bed. Now they're supposed to be potty trained. They're still only 3 years old. But your expectations are for them to come out of the terrible twos and somehow be a changed human being. Still 3. Still get tired, but they're out of the nap stage, so they're a little bit cranky. They got to sleep in a big boy, big girl bed. They think also they're 3, so they're big. And they want to be independent and do things on their own, but they're still just 3 years old. Second-year quarterbacks are the exact same thing. Right? I've already started a year in the league. I've already done. Well, you know what? Everybody else has a book on you now. And everybody's expectations of you are for you to be better. And the coach's expectations are for you to be better. So they give you a bigger playbook. They give you more power. They give you more independence. And you're still just in your second year starting in the National Football League. So you're going to make some of the same, if not worse, mistakes. So you got a second-year starting quarterback, which by my estimation is harder than being a first-year starting quarterback. You got a head coach who was a running backs coach at the start of last year. Oh, by the way, I didn't mention, you got an owner in Jimmy Haslam who he changes his opinions on players and coaches and front office people like I changed my gym shorts. And then you factor in that you have Jarvis Landry, you have Odell Beckham Jr., who are best friends, and that doesn't always equate to wins. Talent doesn't equate to wins. Character does. The Giants, the Steelers, copied the Patriots and the Eagles and chose character over talent. The Browns have talent. There is no disputing it. But do they have the character it takes to win big games?